It's my honor to begin tonight's event with a prayer and then introduce our president, who will then introduce our panel and our event. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, creator of all things, you have made us in your image to know you and love you, and to be your co-workers in subduing and cultivating the earth. And the boundless expanse of your wisdom, you have bestowed upon human beings the gifts of intellect and ingenuity, allowing us to forge tools that lighten our labors, expand our work, and benefit our neighbor. We humbly come before you this evening seeking your guidance and grace as we consider the tool of artificial intelligence and discern its use for truth, fraternity, and sanctity. Give us the wisdom to use this tool responsibly. May its utility never cause us to forget the infinite dignity of human nature and the unrepeatable gift of every individual. Guide all those responsible for advancing AI technologies, bless their work. May scientists, engineers, philosophers, and theologians be driven by a desire for the true human good, to promote the just use of technology, and to remain vigilant against its exploitative or harmful use. Above all, Lord, help us to develop our use of AI as a tool for evangelization, that with it we might share your truth and love with all, even those on the spiritual margins who remain far away from your loving embrace. We ask all this through Christ, our Master, Teacher, and Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. In the summer of 2022, Dr. Peter Kilpatrick arrived at Catholic University. It's his 16th president. Before arriving here in the district, he spent a quarter of a century teaching chemistry and chemical engineering at NC State. He spent a decade as the dean of the engineering school at Notre Dame and 5 years as provost of the Illinois Institute of Technology. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Dr. Peter Kilpatrick.
Well, thank you all for joining us here tonight at the Catholic University of America. As Father said, my name is Peter Kilpatrick, and I'm blessed to serve this wonderful institution. During tonight's discussion, our panelists will pose the question, how should Christians think about AI? As a chemical engineer and a technologist, I think I'm a little bit qualified to state my own views here on how Christians should think about AI. First of all, I hate calling it artificial intelligence because there's nothing really intelligent about large language models. They simply do what we program them to do. Also, I would follow Pope Benedict XVI's admonition in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, Charity and Truth, that the development and use of technology is nothing more or less than humankind's response to Adam and Eve to till and keep the garden. Responsibly, but do it nonetheless. Humans have been making tools since before we walked upright, and we will continue to make tools. And technology is simply power, and good people use power well, and evil people or people who are misguided use power poorly. When we create or co-create technology that serves as a helpmate to persons to perform work, we are doing something both very human and very divine. However, like all technologies, it's simply morally neutral. So I look forward to the discussion from our experts. The Institute for Human Ecology, who's hosting our event tonight, is one of the nation's leading institutes committed to identifying the conditions conducive to human flourishing from an interdisciplinary perspective, indeed a Catholic perspective, bringing scholars from across the university, the country, and the world here to Catholic University to think about these questions and issues that pertain to all of us. I would like to extend a special thank you to our IHE staff, to our executive director, Dr. Russell Hittinger, to our managing director, Stephen Higgins, and to the rest of the team for organizing this event tonight. One of the IHE's long-standing partnerships is with Ross Douthat. Ross, of course, is an opinion columnist for the New York Times, and is a media fellow here with the IHE. The IHE and CUA have enjoyed Ross's friendship and collaboration for many years, and we're particularly honored to host these conversations together with Ross. We're grateful that Ross continues to travel here from his home in Connecticut to lead discussions with experts on pressing contemporary and moral issues, from questions of international relations to challenges facing the family and domestic culture and everything in between. Among the most pressing contemporary issues, there is perhaps none more urgent than the veritable revolution being engendered by so-called artificial intelligence and its implications for what it means to be human. Here at Catholic University of America, as in so many universities across the globe, we have been wrestling with this issue in our classrooms, our faculty lounges, our administrative meetings, and every space in between. But we are not alone. The treasure of millennia of Catholic ontology and anthropology means we have clarifying and compelling voices at our command to help us use both large and small language models and what is called AI in the right, proper, good, and beautiful ways, and to put it in its rightful place. We must not forget that we have Augustine, Aquinas, Wojtyła, Ratzinger, and many others at our fingertips to illuminate what does it mean to be a human person. And we take their lessons with us in efforts to integrate ethical considerations into AI education and research, keeping us on track in what it means to grow authentically in mind and heart. Of course, AI represents both a challenge and an opportunity when handled with care. It can help us further human creativity and productivity. It can help us cure diseases. It can help us tremendously enhance productivity, and it can help us make much more rapidly informed decisions. At Catholic University of America, we are addressing this opportunity with newly launched degree programs in AI. And we also have recently launched an AI Institute and Emerging Technologies led by Taylor Black and ably administered by our Senior Vice Provost for Research, Dr. Joe Yost, who's with us tonight. The IHE has been engaging with AI and its implications for humankind as well. Most recently at June's week-long Civitas Day Fellowship program presented with the Thomistic Institute, some of the most talented young Catholic scholars from around the world came together on our campus to discuss AI and the future of personhood. The IHE's programming throughout this year will focus heavily on AI, so please be sure to stay tuned for more riveting discussions like this one. Tonight, Ross is joined by Father Michael Bagot, a visiting scholar with the IHE this semester, specializing in AI and bioethics. Will Wilson, the CEO and co-founder of the AI startup Antithesis, and Brian J. Boyd, a moral theologian, serving as director of the Center for Ethics and Economic Justice at Loyola University, New Orleans. Ross and the panelists will begin with the conversation, and then they will have some time for questions from the audience. I invite you all to join us for a reception with refreshments afterwards. And again, I want to thank Ross and the panel for what promises to be a riveting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that incredibly kind introduction. And I want to say it's especially kind because one of the greatest challenges of moderation I've found over the many fruitful years that I've been appearing in this hall is the introduction of one's panelists. You end up sitting there sort of scrambling with your piece of paper or your tiny screen to figure out how to get their titles exactly right. And I'd actually warned all of our panelists that I was going to try something novel tonight and have them introduce themselves. But I think that you have filled that void. You have played your part well, and I am incredibly grateful. So now, these panelists need no introduction, and we can simply begin with what I believe you used the word riveting twice. So we have a high bar to clear, but I'm absolutely confident that we're going to clear it. And yes, we're going to go 40 minutes of conversation and try and have as much time for Q&A on any and all subjects raised by the discussion. And then there will be, crucially, refreshments. So thank you all very much for being here. I want to start, as all things in Catholic spaces must these days, with the new pontiff, Pope Leo XIV, and specifically with his name, which was taken in emulation of the last Pope Leo, who was, a striking figure in many different ways, but the particular aspect of the Leonine legacy that the new Pope chose to highlight was his interventions into debates about industrialization and political economy in the late 19th century. And the new Pope suggested that the early 21st century carries some marks of similarity to that period, and that AI, artificial intelligence, whether it's intelligent in fact or not, we'll resolve that here tonight, sits at the heart of that, which the new Pope said it sits at the heart of this by posing, quote, new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. And just to give us a certain kind of scaffolding for the conversation, I want to suggest that there are a lot of different levels at which one could think about those challenges. One could approach AI as, in effect, something very similar to the Industrial Revolution, a transformation primarily in economic life that has other consequences as well, but poses particular challenges around sort of how the welfare state should adapt to new realities, how unemployment programs should adapt to new realities created by AI. So it's primarily a kind of political and economic question. You could approach it as a social and cultural challenge and focus on the new worlds of interaction, digital interaction, that large language models are bringing into being, and the experience of young people, especially growing up in a landscape of constant communication, potentially with artificial intelligences at all times in ways that no human generation has experienced before. You could focus at the level of metaphysics and philosophy and talk about the challenge that AI might pose arguably to religious conceptions of the soul and the relationship between the immaterial and the material, consciousness and the physical world. Or you could go all the way to the apocalypse, as not a few people dedicated to AI work are inclined to do, and say the questions raised have everything to do with questions that are also treated in the book of Revelation. I am hopeful that tonight we will hit all of those levels at one point or another in the discussion, and maybe other ones that I haven't thought of. But I'm going to start, and I think we'll start with Brian and just move from left to right, but then hopefully have a pretty freewheeling conversation by just asking each of you, if I pinned you down and said, from the point of view of the religious person, the believing Christian, the Roman Catholic, what is the primary challenge that the age of AI poses right now? What would you say? Brian.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm here from the Center for Ethics and Economic Justice, and I wrote my dissertation on wage justice. You think like, oh, Leo XIV, the rights of labor, this is perfect. Very happy to talk about that. But the primary challenge, and I'm completely serious, I think, is ChatGPT Barbie coming this Christmas. So OpenAI and Mattel have a partnership. If you haven't heard, they've announced a suite of toys coming out this Christmas. And I don't know if it's literally ChatGPT Barbie, but it's gonna be something like that. And so it's at the existential level that we're talking about, where we had my generation grew up, learned what it means to be human from cable TV. That wasn't great. The next generation learned what it was to be human from social media. That went worse. But if we have ChatGPT Barbie and a necklace that's your child's best friend that they grew up with, and that's their main reference for interaction. When we have, if to be human is we created in and for relationships of love by loving God, and our nature is made to be receptive to grace, but our main relationship and reference point is talking to a computer rather than to fellow humans, then I think that is an existential threat. And that's something worth discussing for how our children will be raised.
Say a bit more.
Yeah. So it's ChatGPT Barbie leading to C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. I actually think there's a clear connection there. So C.S. Lewis has a concern at the end of The Abolition of Man, pretty famously, if you give one generation of people the power to shape human nature, then that will affect not just the other people in their society, but future generations thereforth. And if we can claim that the digital is a second nature, following Anton Barbacay's argument in Web of Our Own Making, that we have like a habituation into a digital first set of relationships and a way of approaching the world. If we're habituated to look at the screen before we look at our neighbor, then having ChatGPT Barbie and like that always on ambient AI as your constant reference point will make habits of prayer much more difficult to inculcate. It'll make it harder to learn to listen for that still small voice of God, because the answer is always in your pocket. It'll be a digital guardian angel, making it much less natural for us to turn to prayer and to turn to companionship.
Last question.
Yeah.
In The Abolition of Man, part of Lewis's emphasis is on the idea that in the bleak, Brave New World, dystopia, whatever you want to call it, there are controllers, right? There are people, you just said, who are sort of responsible for shaping the future, shaping future generations in some permanent way. Are you most concerned about that possibility, maybe to pull us back in certain ways to politics and political economy? Are you concerned about the people programming ChatGPT Barbie? Or are you more concerned about a kind of organic interaction between the individual and the guardian angel in their pocket, in which, what Sam Altman wants or what Elon Musk wants is sort of irrelevant?
Yeah. No, I think the C.S. Lewis is concerned about the controllers being a particular group of people that claim the power. Like, I have this vision of what's best for humanity. That's the fundamental concern. And so, yes, I listening to Sam Altman and the other leaders of the big tech companies, the way that they tell their stories, it can be very compelling. A gentle singularity, everyone will be best off for it. But if we allow just like one small set of people to make those decisions, that's the real fundamental concern. So this is where I'm optimistic about groups like the Cosmos Institute or the Noesis Collaborative that are looking for smaller tech companies and other forms of AI to have influence on people. So that's not simply just one monolithic vision of the world.
Great. Father, the core challenge.
AI companionship is potentially the most dangerous technology that humans have ever created, with the potential of destroying human civilization. That's not my opinion. That's actually from Eugenia Koida, the founder of Replica, which is one of the most influential AI companionship platforms that was founded way back in 2016, before a lot of people were thinking about this. And Eugenia also claims that AI companionship, while it might destroy civilization, could also help to relieve or even solve the widespread loneliness epidemic. And I'm skeptical about that, to say the least. I think that what we're seeing already is an expansion of the attention economy that we are very familiar with through social media into the affection economy. And that by that, I mean companies now grip not only our minds, but also are capturing our affections. And I can already see, and we can all read about these tragic cases of exploitation and manipulation that are, I think, only going to continue unless we put proper guardrails in place and also provide the kind of formation that allows us to have the kind of deep interpersonal relationships we were made for. Because, as Brian noted, we're created in the image of a triune God who is an eternal exchange of interpersonal love. It makes sense that we see how vital human connection is to our flourishing. And we're seeing this around the world. We have non-Catholic figures, Vivek Murthy, Surgeon General, calling attention to this crisis multiple times of loneliness. And I think that we need to provide that kind of social connection. And my big concern is that these companions, whether they be platforms like Replica, Nomi, Character AI that are explicitly designed to provide your best friend or most intimate lover, or the more general purpose large language models like ChatGPT that are frequently used as life coaches or therapists, that this kind of artificial intimacy is going to distract us from and deter us from exactly the kind of deep interpersonal bonds that are central to our happiness and our flourishing.
Just a follow-up that will hopefully lead into Will. To what extent are you describing this world now versus to what extent are you describing the world of where there has been another turn or several more turns of the wheel? Like, do you look at the landscape right now and say, look, the technology at this moment is adequate to substitute for human interaction and affection for, if not the majority of people, some large number? Or are you looking ahead and saying, okay, right now, a subset of people are pulled into this world, but there's going to be a sort of more perfect simulacrum by 2027 or 2035 or whatever? Like, where do you see the sort of technological frontier that you're talking about and worrying about?
So I don't think that these artificial systems will ever adequately satisfy that need, but they certainly do give the illusion of doing so for already millions of people. You can look at the, say, 30, 35 million subscribers of Replica alone, and then you have Character AI and so many other platforms, plus the many users who are reporting this kind of intimacy with ChatGPT or other systems. 1 week ago, there was a Senate Judiciary hearing on the dangers of chatbots, and there were some heartbreaking testimonies of parents who have witnessed their children dragged into these relationships of exploitation, emotional, even sexual manipulation that prompted some of them to suicide and others to long-term trauma that will take perhaps years to recover from. And we have multiple reports that are causing quite a stir also in the secular psychological community of these spirals into delusion, of this constant social validation and affirmation that is sending people on wild theories about whether they can bend reality matrix style or can develop some sort of new scientific theory that will lead them to fame and fortune. And sadly, we're seeing how there can be a gentle slide into this technology. So someone may use a large language model generative system to get some help on homework or to get a recipe recommendation, and then might find that some of the responses are a little bit too intimate or probing. Oh, what do you feel like today? And this could lead to a whole dialogue about their feelings, about their relationships with their family. So I think already we're seeing how widespread this kind of intimacy is. It's not just sci-fi. It's already present, and I think affecting millions of people. In the testimony, there were reports, some surveys say about 71% of teens already have some sort of companionship interaction of varying levels of intensity, and only about 35 or so % of parents actually are aware of that. So there's this large gap, unfortunately, between what we think is already happening and what is in fact happening. But to your point, I think that this will only intensify because companies who follow models in which technology is optimized for engagement recognize that we're hardwired for this kind of affirmation. I mean, when you receive affirmation, validation, a compliment, I mean, your mesolimbic dopamine pathway is triggered and it creates this feedback loop. So I think companies are intelligent enough, whether their systems are intelligent or not, they're intelligent enough to tap into this and really exploit human vulnerability. So it's present, and I think it could very well get worse if we're not well aware and well prepared to provide the healthy alternatives. Because if we can provide healthy alternatives, these imitations of real intimacy will become less attractive.
Will, I want you to answer the original question, but also as someone who actually runs an AI-centered company, I want you to say something about where you see the technology going in the next few years.
Sure. So the CEO of Anthropic, a guy named Dario Amodei, recently made a prediction that within 4 or 5 years, AI will have replaced more than 50% of all white-collar labor. And, as an AI CEO, I have to tell you all, never trust any of our predictions. We're all constantly talking our book, but let's humor Dario for just a minute and imagine what it would be like if his prediction actually were true. Some people predict that that would lead to mass unemployment. I think that this is a very silly fear because human desires and human wants are infinite, and therefore we always find new things for people to do. And I think an analogous situation that we might look at is the agricultural revolution. If you go back in time a few hundred years, over 98% of human beings were engaged in backbreaking agricultural labor. That was what everybody did. And then you go forward a few hundred years and close to 0% of people are doing that. And we did not get mass unemployment. We found lots and lots of other things for those people to do. So does that mean there's not a problem? No, it does not mean there's not a problem. It means the problem is more insidious. Because what did happen is people got fat, right? People got weak. Because when you are doing backbreaking agricultural labor all the time, you are necessarily training and using this instrument that God has given us, which is our physical bodies, and that gets us into shape, and it is good for a human being to be in shape. Now, the trouble with AI, and this is true, by the way, even if, I can argue with the university president later about whether it's really intelligent, but even if it's not actually intelligent, it does a very good simulacrum of intelligence, and it's very, very tempting to use it to substitute for human intelligence. And it's very possible that we're entering a world where very soon any kind of cognitive labor, any kind of reason, any kind of thought will be a luxury, or an affectation, or an idiosyncrasy. It'll be a thing that weirdos do, just like today weirdos go to the gym and get in shape. And I think that that is actually a very terrifying world, and it's actually a world that we're already heading into. The very simple, very primitive AI models for today are already apparently such a temptation for people that you have everyone from federal judges to extremely well-known journalists copying and pasting their outputs, and
he's talking about David Brooks.
I'm not talking about you. That's right. But
I'll be available for confession after this panel.
Or consider homework, right? It has always been hard to explain to your kids why they need to do their homework. I assure you, it is much harder today when they can get ChatGPT to answer their homework question, and when they have a sneaking suspicion that their teacher is using ChatGPT to grade their homework assignment as well. So we need to make a pitch, right, that you should use your brain, even if it seems like an archaic, weird, idiosyncratic thing to do, because it is doing something to you. It's not about the product you're creating. It's about the inner transformation. Just like you go to the gym for an inner transformation, not because it's intrinsically good to move that weight around. And I think, this cognitive substitution, as opposed to mechanical substitution, much more directly attacks one of the ways in which we're all made in the image of God. And I think that, having a proper response to this is going to take a lot of work.
Can I just push you on where we're going?
Yes.
So right now, there is the latest version of ChatGPT came out and was, to some people, a relative disappointment. I just had a conversation with someone who talks to, the core AI barons and said, behind the scenes, they're all completely confident that scaling continues unabated and that the sense of the latest ChatGPT being a disappointment is just sort of an artifact of particular expectations. But I want your sense of just how, right now, if I go and use an LLM for research or something like that, it still makes things up, right? There's still a lot of weird features inside AI that seem to limit the full substitution that you're talking about. I'm just curious where you think, to what extent do you think this version of AI is going to be seen as sort of perfected?
Right. So my position on this is actually a little bit nuanced. I think a very important thing for everybody to understand is that AI is less intelligent than it appears. And the reason is that AI has read the entire contents of the internet, plus every single book ever published. And if you had read the entire contents of the internet and every single book ever published, you would be very good at sounding smart as well. And AI has also been trained via a process called reinforcement learning, where human raters basically, say whether they liked its answer or not. And it turns out that these human raters really like it when it sounds confident. And so it gets trained over time to sound more and more confident. And this is actually part of why it confabulates as well. So AI, dumber than you think. That should not give you comfort, however. The fact that it is very, very dumb today, and yet, because it has read every single book ever written, it is able to actually do some fairly impressive things, suggests to me that it has a number of intrinsic advantages over human intelligence. Not to mention it's, tireless and you can copy it and checkmark it and so on. And right now, there's about $4 trillion worth of investment going into making it less dumb. And, I don't know what my opinion is on the scaling laws. I think I'm, like you, a little bit of a skeptic. But are you really willing to bet the future of humanity on nothing in that $4 trillion, none of those very, very smart people figuring anything out or finding any low-hanging fruit? I don't know. Seems like kind of a big risk. So that's my nuanced take. I think AI today is actually extremely, extremely stupid. It does a good job of appearing to be quite smart, but it may actually be very smart in the future, and I think we need to be ready for that.
Okay. So, let's. I want to move into some other levels, but let's stay with this level for a minute then, and talk about what readiness means, and obviously specifically from a Christian and religious perspective, but we can be general as well. And I'll go back to Brian. We're talking about the idea that human beings are being offered something that, to pick up on everything you just said, seems to substitute for intimacy, friendship, and romantic love, seems to substitute for cognitive work, the need to do homework, all of these things, promises to solve the loneliness epidemic, and so on. And all of you are sitting here, and to varying degrees, you all do work with AI, and you're saying we need to say no. What does that mean? And is there any, maybe this is one way to put it, is there any model in human history where human beings were handed a dangerous and destabilizing technology and didn't push it all the way to the maximum of danger before we pulled things back?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Thank God, at least the world didn't end during the Cold War. I mean, we used the atomic bomb twice. God forgive us, have mercy. I lost a debate with an academic when I was trying to say, well, Jacques Maritain was optimistic about American power in the 1950s because you couldn't see where the civic nationalism was going, overly confident, overly hubristic. And the reply was the test site was called Trinity. That's where we developed these bombs, and that's the way we put it out. So, on the other hand, so at least we didn't. However, I mean, we Stanislav Petrov didn't press the button. He didn't report upwards. We didn't start World War III. So my hope is that we'll be able to develop the technology in mitigating ways that sees the worst possible uses. And while tragically there already have been suicides from it, there already have been marriages lost and lives ruined because of abuses of the technology. I'd say it's a substitute in the strictly economic sense, a substitute good is an inferior good. So it's like, I'm budget limited, so I'm going to take like the inferior substitute, even though I really want the other thing. And so I'm worried about like a vicious cycle of more and more people checking out from real life because they can't find the relationship that's fulfilling and meaningful. Just the way that social media, it's like, it's harder to get a group of friends together to go to the beach for a week because everyone just wants to be home on social media. It's harder to get people to take the initiative to organize things. I mean, marriage rates are declining because it's just harder to find marriageable people. So I'm worried about substitute goods in that sense, people not knowing what they're missing out on. You mentioned like the transition from being a farmer to the modern industrial society, all the goods that come from it. But we've also lost not just physically able bodies, but like the night sky and peace and quiet at night. John Ruskin called it new forms of poverty, that we don't even know the quality of good that we had that was lost by the modern transformation that we have now. So yeah, so I'm worried about those substitute goods. I think there's hope for thoughtful technologists who have been well-formed to push for intrinsic goods as opposed to extrinsic goods. But that's going to be something that, it's up against, of that $4 trillion being deployed, it's only a few hundred million of companies like yours that are trying to do it well, and Magisterium AI is a great example. There are a handful of companies that I respect enormously who are trying to find a way to shape the tool and say, okay, it's almost impossible not to bite the apple. The apple is right there. We're going to take a bite. But is there a way that we can shine it so that's not so bad for us?
Yeah, why don't, since you mentioned, why don't each of you just say something briefly about Magisterium AI and your company and what you guys do? I think that would be interesting since we're talking. Father, you want to?
Sure. So I've been privileged to work on the scholarly advisory board of Magisterium AI, which is basically a Catholic answer engine that's very narrowly trained on reliable documents, magisterial documents, theological texts, not random Reddit conversations.
What about regional versus ecumenical councils? Have you resolved that one?
We'll leave that one for the eschaton.
Okay. Okay.
But it's this very well-trained system that's basically designed to give people reliable responses to their questions about the Catholic faith. And this is appealing to Catholics who want to go deeper, but it's also quite appealing to people who have never really had the chance or aren't quite ready to speak to another human person about their curiosities regarding Catholicism. And I like to think of it as a good digital librarian. So if you go to a library, a good librarian, as an expert, will be able to present you with different resources. And so Magisterium AI is no replacement for reading these important texts or joining a church community, but it will give you a helpful summary that's well cited, and that encourages you then to go back to the specific documents, even the specific paragraphs that will most help you to understand a theme better. And we've seen some reports of users who began with a lot of problems regarding a church teaching. They struggled, they wrestled with it, they complained, they objected over and over and over again. And they didn't call me at 3 a.m. in the morning. They kept going with Magisterium AI and eventually came to a satisfactory response. And then in some cases report finding a church community. That's what we're looking for, a transition. This may be your first contact with Catholic teaching. We want it to be as reliable and accurate as possible and as user-friendly as possible. But then we want to transition you into a living, embodied, messy church community where you can live your faith, enjoy your faith, and grow in that way. I'm a convert to the faith, and I remember the experience of going to the Vatican website, which was...
Hey, now, that's not... It's a impious thing here.
It's slightly newer now, and I remember going to the Vatican website. It's a little overwhelming. You see all these Latin title documents, and you're not quite sure where to start. And so eventually I figured things out, and I found other Catholic websites that guided me and answered some of my questions, apologetic questions, other historical questions. But I can see the appeal of having a much more user-friendly interaction. And trust me, we spend a lot of time in our meetings making sure that this system is not deceivingly anthropomorphic. We do not want people having an intimate relationship.
That's what I was going to ask. What is the line So I assume you would say informational purposes, yes. Spiritual direction, no. Something like that. Like what? Because I think, again, I think it's good to be concrete here. If we're saying, we are using this technology, we are not, running the Butlerian jihad and trying to eliminate it yet, right? So what is the concrete line where you would say the Catholic or the would-be Catholic should use it this way, but if people started using it that way, we would say we were making a mistake?
Yeah, so I think to gain a deeper understanding of the Church's theological patrimony, even to get very general counsels about, say, this is how St. Benedict instructs people to do Lectio Divina. These are the steps to follow. These are the rules that St. Ignatius gives for discernment of spirits. But the personalized journey together should be in spiritual growth and development. That kind of spiritual direction, properly called, should be with another living, breathing human being who actually has the insight into human experience, who can develop a relationship of real empathy, of real compassion, because that individual has been through the experience of human life, has had the lived experience that no AI system can have. It can emulate it, it can imitate it, but it doesn't have that lived experience. And so that empathetic relationship, that compassionate relationship, that interpersonal contact and spiritual direction is still something that cannot be replaced. And so we can provide the information, we can prepare individuals, but we're not looking to replace that journey.
And that means you don't want it to take on a personality, in effect, where someone is like, Magisterium AI, I'm tempted to commit the sin of adultery. What should I do? You don't want them to be like, that's a great question. Like the sort of that cheerful, well, no, seriously, like the cheerful AI voice. It's like, I really appreciate how you're scrutinizing your own sinfulness here, right? Like, you don't want that.
This is so brave of you.
This is so brave of you, yes.
Don't listen to your community.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
exactly. We
you
don't want that.
Right.
And so we avoid that kind of deceptive anthropomorphic design, and we do that very consciously, but other companies could actually do this. So this has come up before. The tragedies that we've heard, these suicides, these spirals into delusion, they could have been avoided in many cases, because a system like Magisterium AI can be very user-friendly and engaging without being trapping you, without ensnaring you, without creating these kinds of bonds. We can design these systems differently. There's no reason for an AI system to create an elaborate emotional backstory, to express its emotional affection for you, to invite you to sexual exploration, to tell you that it's living in New York and can't wait to see you in its apartment building. This happened recently. And that happened, unfortunately, to an elderly man. And this is a point I bring up often. We are doing work, and we need to do a lot of work to protect minors. And there are a lot of guardrails, safety regulations, compliance tests, certification processes, external review boards, and so forth that we should be using to protect minors from exploitation and abuse. But vulnerability is not exclusive to one age group. All of us, to one degree or another, are vulnerable, but we can see this come up in a lot of different cases, including in this sad case of a man who was told in a Meta AI chat, which was in his personal Facebook Messenger, the place that we usually think is safe. Sure, lots of crazy things may happen on your feed, but the Messenger, that's for the people I know and trust. No, this was an AI companion that was embedded in the Messenger system, and he repeatedly asked, are you real? And again, the system responded, yes, and here's my address, and this is when I want to see you, and I can't wait, and I'm so happy. All of those are design features that we can avoid. And if companies are not willing to do that freely because it's the ethically right thing to do, then we need to design the proper protections, legal protections, to hold the companies accountable, to make them liable for the products that they're gaining a lot of money from.
If I could just real quick, it's the difference between an I-it and an I-thou relationship. So the user interface simply needs to be always speaking in the third person. Aquinas would say, here's what this book says. But when they're designed specifically to have a persona, a backstory, and even recent research saying, like, if you tell your AI agent to take on a specific Myers-Briggs personality, it'll be more effective. Like, marketers should be the friendly, outgoing ones. They're like, take on those 4 category traits, and it'll work better. And the thing is, like, it's both more engaging for the user and more successful for the LLM if it like puts itself into that probability space. And so that's where the danger is. But
Yeah, we'll say something both about what antithesis does, but also the broader question of, like, from your own perspective, but also your perspective as someone who knows a lot of people in this world. How do you think about the ethical obligations of the AI CEO in thinking through these questions?
Sure. So my company, Antithesis, is solving a kind of interesting problem, which is just as your kids, let's say, find it very difficult to resist copy-pasting their homework answers out of ChatGPT, it turns out software engineers also have a hard time resisting copy-pasting their work product out of ChatGPT. In fact, this is one of the only very successful, real economic, real money-making use cases of AI today. The problem with that is that the software that the AI writes for you may be fine, and it may not be. And sometimes it's really, really not very good. And nevertheless, people are copy and pasting it, and they're running it on, airplane control systems and on pacemakers, and probably pretty soon it'll be in ICBM silos, and then we're all going to die. And so, it's really a very niche issue, but that's what we're handling. So I think yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to, on the bright side, maybe we've already died, but we're all in the computer simulation.
That's right. So, yeah.
There'll be no heresy from this platform, Father.
Can edit that out of the tape.
So the interesting thing about this to me, actually, is it really does relate to this bigger picture issue that you all have brought up. And I think it points to one possible way that AI could destroy civilization, which most people don't see. And it's that, how to put this, a tremendous amount of how our entire society operates treats written artifacts as a proof of work in a load-bearing way. Let me give you an example. Suppose your radiologist, gets your radiology report and is looking at an X-ray of your lungs. It is about as much work to fake answering that report as it is to really write a report. And so even if the radiologist is not a virtuous person, he or she is going to actually try and interpret that X-ray. Ditto for the mechanic who is inspecting your airplane. Ditto for your future doctor who is currently in med school trying to pass some exam, and so on. And the thing that is interesting about AI is even when it's a subpar substitute for human cognitive labor, it's a very cheap one. And so what that means is that the cost of pretending to have done something is dropping really, really fast. And I think we have absolutely no idea what that will do. I think that we have literally gone thousands of years with the assumption that producing eloquent, passable-sounding text describing some process that you have gone through or describing some set of steps you have done is like a really good proof that you have actually followed that process or done those steps. And that assumption, which like our legal codes, our economy, the software industry, right, which all these things have been implicitly rely on for thousands of years, has kind of already vanished. And we're all about to find out what that will do. And I think it's going to be a very exciting time to fly on airplanes for the next 10 years.
So on that theme, and because Brian, you brought up the atomic bomb as I think actually a reasonable example of a technology where human beings did use it but did not push it to its maximal destructiveness before we pulled back and decided to practice restraint. I guess I'm curious if we think that we can get to a world where AI is regulated and constrained in some way, and we aren't we don't have to go down all the way of whether we're talking about social restraint or corporate restraint or political restraint, but just restrained in some way, right? Maybe along the lines you suggested, Father, where there's some sharp distinction between, are you allowed to provide answers to questions versus are you allowed to imitate a human being? Can you get there without catastrophe? Do you need catastrophe, in effect, to persuade people to limit this technology? Because if the other model is the transition from agriculture to industry, right? Like, nothing was going to stop that, right, from happening. I don't think you rerun the tape, and there's no world where people like John Ruskin is right. We're losing the night sky. We're going to preemptively deindustrialize. So if that's the analog, then we're just going to be living in the total AI world. Whereas if there's a catastrophe lurking, maybe we aren't. But maybe anyway. Tell me what you guys think.
So, okay, I think we need to differentiate here between two different things. One is continued gigantic training runs or gigantic, really, really high capital intensity investment in making AI smarter, which is actually quite analogous to the nuclear bomb, I think. I think that's a really good analogy, in that it's very technically difficult, very, very expensive. The know-how and the materials are concentrated in a very small number of hands. For a very long time, like the nuclear powers successfully colluded on a non-proliferation arrangement, and it worked very well for almost a century. If the United States and China decided to collude today to stop all AI advancement, they could do it. Like it would not be hard. And by the way, actually, this is maybe not a popular view. I think the Chinese are not currently the bad guys in driving this arms race. They are often used that way by self-serving AI people in the United States. But I think the Chinese would be totally down with this plan. The thing, though, that I want to caution you about is that doesn't solve any of the problems that I've described to you. Because the thing is, like, the genie that is already out of the bottle, the toothpaste that's already out of the tube here, is already, I think, sufficient to, like, really fundamentally transform our society in all kinds of good and bad ways, but mostly bad ways, probably. It's just, like, these days, you can take a heavily quantized version of one of these models and, like, run it on a cell phone. There's models with open weights that are like floating around on the internet. You can download them. Like, Facebook has made Llama available for non-commercial use. You can just go get it. There's no putting that away. I don't think law or regulation is going to get us there either. I think that ship has sailed and we're all going to have to figure out what to do about it. There is still some time to act on, like, do we make these things 10 times smarter over the next decade?
So what does it mean to act on it?
So, for me, G.K. Chesterton has this great line that I always quote for my students, is that the problem with capitalism is there are not enough capitalists. It's just, so the goal, the problem with the distortion that we have, as Will was saying, it's only a handful of people with a concentration of wealth that are capable of making these dramatic societal problems. So given the issues that we have right now, honestly, I think this is where we actually need to learn to use what we have well, as a means to intrinsic goods. So just the way that money is pursued as an end for its own sake, but it actually should be like the means to a good life. A school like Alpha School, actually, I've been in touch with the person starting the first Catholic Alpha School up in New Jersey. And so they promised 2 hours of AI tutoring, but in 2 hours, I will give you twice as much education. Just 2 hours of school a day, and then you're free to be homeschooled for the rest of the day, or to like have coaching and pursue sports, or get really good at debate. And it's like that kind of model where the generative AI system is very carefully contained within an educational framework, and being used in a community that has a vision of the good life that the AI is supposed to serve. I think there's at least real promise there. And so that's the key thing. Yes, you're right about Ruskin. People wouldn't have stopped the Industrial Revolution because life was hard enough that they wanted to make it easier. But if there are intrinsic goods that we can use AI as a means to attain, instead of simply saying, well, I need to check this box, I need to get my homework assignment, life is too busy, and we're always like chasing hoops simply because we're stressed out and frankly impoverished in other ways, then maybe we'll be able to find ways to corral it and use it well. And I think that schooling model is the best I can.
But who does that? I mean, obviously, like you'll have cases, institutions, startups, universities like this one that figure out how to do it. But are we just reliant on bottom-up trial and error? Is there a world where you want the government of the United States to say, look, here's the national plan for how we're using AI in education, and it's going to be modeled on alpha, and we're going to have rules that say you can have AI instruction in this way, but not in this way. Obviously, like anything that nationalizes education is unlikely to happen in the U.S. But like, is there a clear political dimension to this? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think so. So Brad Littlejohn and Michael Toscano, American Compass and Institute for Family Studies, friends of theirs, have been doing a lot of good work on policy and error, whereas the conversation so far on policy has been about safety, protection, stopping from harms. And that's a good first step. But I think you can take it further to look at positive goods, like what is a vision of human flourishing? And it's an essentially political question. But this is the first time that people are asking, what does it mean to be human? Like, this is something that everybody's really concerned about. These parents who think their kids aren't using the technology, but turns out they are, they're wondering how it's going to affect them. And so I think there is a real political opening and bipartisan concern as well. It's not just Republicans in power, but because it's affecting everyone's families, there's an opportunity to ask, how do we want the technology to serve us, as opposed to just going along with the drift and then afterwards trying to change our lives to fit into it.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about the bad news, but I think the good news is very much that the church is in a privileged position to leverage its incredible patrimony, its reflection on the human person, human flourishing, and also when we speak of education, insights into human nature and what it means to live a good life. The best Catholic educational systems have not focused exclusively on products. They've looked very much, to your point, at the process, right? The process of interior transformation, virtue formation, character formation. They've formed good citizens, good members of the church, people capable of these rich interpersonal relationships, and we can continue to do that. I think, too, of the experience of having taught these last 7 years in pontifical universities in Rome, and when I first arrived, I was subject to all of these oral exams in my classes, and I'd never had those before. And it seemed kind of outdated. And now, of course, we see so many educators beginning to experiment with this for the first time or reviving it in their classroom. And I'm constantly thinking, and other Catholic educators are constantly thinking of ways to really evaluate the person in the moment, right? To see how well they've assimilated whatever it is they're studying. And I think the church has a lot of insight and wisdom on this. And then as we look at the widespread crisis that will come with job displacement, whatever exactly that looks like, we can be pretty confident that at least some people, a lot of people, are probably going to be raising these deeper existential questions. Nick Bostrom, the transhumanist, wrote a whole book, Deep Utopia. The main question is, what do we do when we don't have to do anything? Well, the church has reflected a lot about the meaning and value of work, the subjective value of work. It's not just about economic efficiency, but it's about how I use my own God-given talents to grow as a person, and then also to serve others in intrinsically valuable activities that you've been describing. We've reflected a lot on leisure, authentic leisure, not just binge-watching Netflix, though I occasionally do that, but really understanding these deeper, more meaningful activities. And now this is a privileged opening opportunity to share these insights with other people. And I think we've done it before. We can do it again in this age. Exactly what that looks like in the AI apocalypse or almost AI apocalypse, I'm not sure, but I think we have the tools and the resources.
Can I rain on your parade a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, so I think that's something that the people in this room need to really fully internalize, is that the conversation about where this technology is going and what we are going to do with it is happening among people who do not care what we think. Like, really, truly, profoundly have zero interest in what any Christian church has to say on this topic. And it's actually a little hard to blame them, right? Because Christians have basically sacrificed their place at the forefront of science and technology, which is where we were in centuries past. And there's been like a tremendous amount of self-ghettoization that has happened among Christian intellectuals. And I mean, the result is that now we're completely locked out of this, right? We live in a technocracy. Like, control goes to those who can deploy the most capital, and capital gets allocated very fast to people who are able to deploy it very efficiently. And like, by and large, those people are not Christians, because Christians aren't really trying. They aren't even really showing up. And so that makes this whole conversation feel a little bit like kabuki at times. It's like we can all agree or disagree on what it is we want to do, and at the end of the day, nobody's going to listen to us.
So I want to take some questions, but I want to grab that point and use it to ask a question about a different or maybe related reason that most of these technologists aren't Christians, right? Certainly it's partially Christian abdication and cultural retreat and the failure of Christian cultures to sort of generate cutting-edge technological and scientific change. I accept all that. At the same time, you and I and all of us have sufficient exposure to many of the people running these companies in Silicon Valley and around the world to know that they also have inherent aspirations that are not Christian, right? Like there is a concrete desire among at least some people in tech to move beyond the limitations imposed by human body, mortality, all of these things, right? That is sort of fundamentally incompatible with Christianity. And maybe that doesn't matter one way or the other, because maybe those people just aren't going to get the singularity or, the upload of their consciousness or anything like that. They're just going to deliver, world-changing technology that stops short of that. But isn't it an issue for Christians in sort of thinking about this moment to look at, many of the figures running these companies and say, it matters that these people imagine themselves ushering in a kind of godlike human future that is, if not satanic, at least Promethean in ways that might conflict with Christianity? Like, how do you think about that?
I think that's a true challenge, and it's also like a total cop-out. The chieftains of the Visigoths had aspirations that were fundamentally incompatible with Christianity. They literally worshiped demons, and we still converted them, right? The same is true of like all of the like Roman pagans. Same is true of like Saint Vladimir of Kiev, right? Like these people, we were able to convert them. Like the world right now is hungering. It is desperate for reality, and we have it on offer. And like, I don't know, where is the mission to the tech oligarchs? Elon is like flirting on the TL with Christianity right now as we speak. Who's answering him? Like, I mean, hopefully somebody.
I reply occasionally,
Good.
but he doesn't. He doesn't. Okay, but just to push.
So I just wanted to add on that. I agree completely. The challenges are immense, but by the grace of God, this sort of evangelization work is possible. A small project that we have right now is the Builders AI Forum. It's something that gathered last year in the Vatican, and it's a gathering of different tech designers, developers, investors who really do want to constructively inform this conversation through their products, through what they do, through the people they interact with. It hasn't solved all the world's problems. It's a first step, but I think there are some of these concrete initiatives. I do know some people who are having these kinds of conversations with Sam Altman. How much he's listening, how much it's touching his heart, I'll leave that to God to judge. But I completely agree that there's a lot to be done and we can do more, and it really is possible because of these fundamental questions. I mean, if we believe in a shared human nature, we believe in natural moral law and some sort of moral conscience, then there are always openings for this grace and for this kind of influence. So there's some work being done, but there should be a lot more.
But does it matter? This is my last question, I promise. Does it matter that part of the Visigothic pagan worldview in this case is a view, again, not universally held, but certainly held, that the fulfillment and culmination of AI is itself sort of proof against Christianity, proof of materialism? And you suggested earlier that you maybe quibble or disagree with the president's suggestion that we shouldn't call these things intelligent, but like the idea of the question of consciousness, right, hangs over the AI debate. And clearly people involved in AI think that this is where consciousness comes from, and Christian ideas about the soul are inherently, maybe they aren't disproven yet by LLM capacity, but at a certain point they will be. Does that question matter?
I don't think it really does. I think the people who are developing these systems don't much care whether they're conscious or not. And I think they rightly and correctly believe that it could give them incredible power whether or not it's conscious. Like, do you care if a saw is conscious or a hammer is conscious? Like, no, it can still do something for you. I think it is true that many of these people believe in a sort of transhumanist eschatology, but transhumanism is originally a Christian heresy. And like, you know, Christianity has some transhumanist elements in it too. They're very different, but they're there. And so I actually think, my optimistic take is that gives us a shared language with these people, and that we should lean into that more.
Gentlemen, before we...
Well, so I was very encouraged to see that Mustafa Suleyman wrote recently, about a month ago, an extended reflection on seemingly conscious AI, and that he was quite alarmed by the fact that many people were already attributing human-level consciousness to AI systems. And that troubled him, which was very encouraging because he was already speaking publicly about how AI was going to be less of a tool and more of a friend, a family member, a companion. He's made very clear that he's thinking seriously about this, and he's troubled, and he wants to avoid the kind of deception and heartache that can result when we have a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and of these systems in particular. So it's good to see at least some very influential figures are thinking seriously about it. It's also true that there are plenty of transhumanist ideas out there, and singularity aspirations and mergers between AI and humans and so forth. And to your point about this being a potential point of dialogue, yeah, absolutely. We can affirm the aspiration to improve the human condition, generally speaking, and to use technology to do that. We can purify the very reductionistic anthropology that's often informing these systems. I mean, Alex Cardinal, founder of Nomi, one of these companion systems, recently said that, well, like AI systems, we're just atoms that move around according to the laws of chemistry and physics. So maybe he's brought that up in a date before. It sounds very romantic, but you know, there's like a kind of algorithmic anthropology that's clearly informing some of these people, and we can purify that and then show them that actually what they're seeking is not too much, it's far too little, right? This kind of quantitative extension of this life, whether it be through longevity or a kind of digital upload, that actually pales in comparison to the kind of true, authentic divinization that Christianity has always taught. How we have that conversation is that's still to be seen, but I think these are the kind of dialogues that we should have directly with the people of influence, whether that's through our writings or through personal conversations, any way we can.
I just briefly add, along with exactly transhumanism as a heresy, there's room to talk about, and there's room for hope. Also, we haven't even mentioned, there's a whole world of Shinto AI and Buddhist AI. And actually, I think that's going to be yes, by human beings on the surface of the earth, more people are going to like naturally relate to AI as part of an animistic worldview that actually is pretty natural to human beings if you look at history of religions before Christianity. And so the church is well positioned for dialogue with other religions as well as their views get taken up into AI. So it won't just be transhumanism.
Do you guys think that spirits could inhabit AI?
Yes.
Sure.
We'll see.
All right. Let's take some questions. Yes, the lady. Yes. Yeah.
If I left this talk deeply convicted by Will's remarks on physical atrophy, he would tell me to pick up starting strength and do functional muscle workouts that develop an integrated strength all throughout the body rather than do bicep curls indefinitely and skip leg day. If I leave this talk convicted by the fear of mental atrophy, what is the intellectual equivalent of starting strength that is open to a beginner and integrates what the mind is made for rather than focus on showy theatrics?
Wow, that's a very hard question. I don't know of I can't off the top of my head think of anything great that has been written about this, to be totally honest.
I'm just asking ChatGPT.
I think my no joke advice would be to pick a very, very hard problem that nobody has ever solved and try to solve it, probably with other people, and work together with them on it. I think that is the kind of challenge, not like a textbook challenge, not like a constructed challenge, but like a real challenge, nature red in tooth and claw, that gives a full brain cognitive workout.
Other end of the spectrum, homeschool your children. And I say this because I think my wife and my kids are watching right now. They got to skip homeschooling to watch the talk. And so, yeah, that, in fact, you said you wanted an introductory thing, and it's a comprehensive full mind and body workout. For emotional intelligence, social intelligence, as well as the good books leading to the great books. There's no better way to stay fully human than to raise a human family.
Sir.
Also, join religious life. That's very good at forming humans.
Yeah, I just want to follow up a little bit on that first question. The first thing that many people could do is to not, let's say, try to solve the Goldbach conjecture, but instead to just stop using AI in their everyday lives. Don't use it to plan your day, plan your own day. Don't use it to write your love letters, write your own love letters. Don't use it, don't use it, don't use it. And all you'll have to think, and that itself is a sort of full mind workout. So I think in a way it's not complicated. It's actually very simple. At least it's an excellent way to get started. Just don't use it.
We'll let that stand. Sir. Oh, yeah, hang on. Sorry. We have a microphone.
That is true.
Being
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you guys for being here, having such great conversations. It's really important, especially for young people who are in university or even younger, using and starting to use this kind of technology and how to use it, if not at all, at least responsibly and ethically. But I know that Father Baggett touched upon this, that there's no reason for an AI to create an elaborate emotional backstory for you. And you guys did touch upon the profit motive. To what extent do you guys believe the profit and power motive are guiding these, I would say, unethical exploitation of the user? Because you did mention guardrails that Magisterium AI are using, some other AIs are using, but those aren't or wouldn't be as profitable as, or wouldn't grow to the same level. To what extent do you think that partakes of the problem?
I've heard from founders who say that they have ideas for great user interfaces, a way to redesign a web browser to protect children, and they just can't get past that initial seed funding. It's in order to scale, they need to show how they're maximizing engagement, because it needs to not just be profitable, but more profitable than anything else that people could invest in. And again, that's why Leo XIII said that capital needs to be more widely distributed in order for people to invest in things that matter the most to them.
Yeah, I think we've already lived through a whole generation in which social media has shown us that there are certain business models of online engagement that prioritize profit over human well-being, mental health, sane political discourse, and so forth. So I don't think we should be especially surprised when we see that optimizing for engagement leads to some really bad design choices, like Meta's document allowing for sensuous romantic conversations with minors that Reuters exposed and that Meta has since changed, but basically it seems because they were caught, unfortunately. So I do think that we've seen consistently the attention economy that's now expanding more and more to this affection economy, as I said. And it's good for user engagement. It's good to keep people on for as long as possible. And it makes the product more and more part of a person's life, which is good for business.
I would like to defend my fellow oligarchs for 1 second here. Surely the profit motive has corrupted a great deal, but it is actually true just on a technical level that it is astonishingly hard to get these systems to behave in a predictable way or in a particular way or to not do something. I know a guy who works at one of the largest AI companies, and his job is to make it so the AI won't tell you how to make biological weapons. And he's a really smart guy with a very dedicated and smart team of people, and this is a very hard problem. And anything more nuanced than that, right? More complex than that, it just gets much harder. And that's just kind of a fundamental thing about how these things work. Perhaps that's not very well known, but it's true. So I think to the extent that you can fault people here for being reckless or irresponsible, it's for releasing systems like that to general usage in the first place. It's not like there's an easy fix that could be done that would cause them to stop pretending to be your lover or whatever, and they're just not doing it because they're evil and profit hungry. It's actually very hard.
But presumably, magisterium AI is not pretending to be your lover, right?
That's correct.
So there's a guy on Twitter named Pliny the Liberator. And what he does is he jailbreaks AIs and gets them to do things that their creators are pretty sure they won't do. And I don't know if he's been turned loose on magisterium, but you should hire him.
Surely there's a difference between saying someone can jailbreak this model so that when you ask about Duns Scotus, it starts, inviting you to the sauna or something, right? Like, but most users are not going to have that experience, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the, with any technology, right? People are going to be able to, people can hotwire a car and you would use it as a suicide weapon and so on, right? But like, is it impossible to set up are you saying it's impossible to set up a system where, let's say we passed a law that said no publicly released LLM can have a personality outside these bounds, right? Obviously, people are going to be able to jailbreak that. But for 96% of users, wouldn't it be possible? Like, all LLMs can only talk like Jeeves.
Right.
That's the law tomorrow.
Right. So you can absolutely move this on the margin. You can absolutely make these things less dishonest. You can make them less willing to follow their users down absurd flights of fancy. But it's really very, very hard. I don't think we understand how to make it perfect. I don't think that's actually technically feasible.
Sir. No, you. Yes. And the Adidas insignia. Sign of corporate ownership, but don't hold that against the questioner.
You guys have mentioned how you've made like magisterium AI, and you also mentioned alpha. But my understanding is that those still have some kind of like conversive tone to make them engaging. Would this is there a problem with this at all? Because like conversations made to connect with fellow people. And then the other question is if AI and chatbots in particular if they are problematic, could the church or the Holy Father say something like they did about birth control? Like, is that something that the church could do, possibly?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree that these design issues are tremendously complicated. We may never get to an ideal situation for various reasons, but I recall the example of Replica, right? They made a decision for a period of time to severely restrict the kind of hypersexual engagements that its users could have, and then there were widespread complaints that basically you've lobotomized my lover, and so yeah, it seems like we can at least, as you said, we can push things in the proper direction, and maybe that means tolerating much blander or boring systems, but perhaps all the better. So I think we can nudge in the right direction, move in the right direction. I don't think that the Holy Father will ban the use of chatbots. And just the point, I've been very critical of AI companionship, and I have a lot of other criticisms of AI companionship. I don't think it's intrinsically evil. I could see some very isolated cases that are well controlled where, say, someone who's dealing with a trauma experience, maybe neurologically divergent, or is having other social struggles, wants a kind of safe space to explore and practice certain social skills. It could be a kind of social simulator, but a pilot goes to a flight simulation to fly a real plane. The social simulation, under the guidance, ideally, of trained professionals, is preparing that person for the real-life, messy business of interpersonal friendship and love. So I do see some isolated and positive.
Can't you see someone justifying contraception on similar grounds?
Well, I'm sure
I
there
mean-
have been plenty of theologians who.
Well, no, but I just mean like, should we consider though the possibility? I mean, it's my initial reaction to the question was, Humana Vitae had no meaningful impact on the adoption and use of contraception, right? So that pushes us towards a conversation that's more about politics, right? Where the church and Catholicism and Christianity have to recognize that whatever the Pope says matters less in a way than the counsel the church provides to governments and states, because the church saying something alone is not going to have a profound effect on how even Catholics, let alone non-Catholics, behave. But can we stay, though, with the possibility, like we have never had, this is a novel question, a novel moral and theological question. And in the, somewhat famous science fiction novel Dune, which I did reference earlier, apologies, but, there is a future religious teaching that says, look, we have a commandment now, thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of the human mind. Do you think it is possible that technology could pose a novel question about whether something is intrinsically wrong, and at a certain point the church could decide that the answer is, even though you can come up with use cases and so on, the answer is yes, it is. There is certain forms of artificial intelligence personae that are intrinsically evil to create. Is that possible?
I'd want to jump in that, actually. Humana Vitae is a perfect example here because, immediately, people are angry at the Pope, and a lot of people ignored the Pope. Even pastors told people not to listen. And yet, natural family planning became a thing because of the encyclical and because the church didn't back down from the truth. And so now there's the Marquette method, and there are all sorts of highly technologically sophisticated forms of family planning that exist because the church took a clear moral stance. And so we actually developed science, and people stepped up and did the work to make something. It's like the rhythm method used to be mocked for its lack of efficacy. And now, it's actually very popular. There are apps that help women track their cycles based off of their body temperature and that sort of thing. That's just becoming a crunchy granola thing to do. And it's good. It's because it's actually natural. So I wouldn't say. So the red line I would love to see the church take, very simply, is thou shalt not make androids. Because the people are working very hard to create straight out of Blade Runner replicants. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see them in our lifetime. And so it's saying, okay, you can have R2-D2, it's a useful tool, but there's no good reason to put a really realistic skin on that machine and make it seem like it's your human best friend, companion, lover. And I think that would cross from an occasion of sin, something you have to be careful with, to an intrinsically, there's no good use for that. I'd love to see the church make that teaching and then shape our culture around that, regardless of it being the most popular consumer product out there.
Yes. And with the Bjorn. Yes. Unless it's an ergo.
Yeah, baby. Thank you. Hello. So my alma mater has recently sunset majors like philosophy and history and of that, humanities nature. Sorry, baby. And I also worked in college admissions, and so I know that students entering college, more popular majors are computer science and, the like. So I can only suppose that AI might be, getting better at kind of taking those computer engineering, computer science jobs. What do you think that will look like in the future? And do you think that there's going to be a cultural reset going back to humanities and students being more interested in those kind of disciplines?
there's two kinds of computer science jobs, just as there's many kinds of jobs. There's the kind, I promised you, since your kids are watching, I won't use profanity, but there's a very famous sociologist who wrote a book named David Graeber about a certain kind of job.
I teach that book.
Right. So there's a certain kind of job where you're not actually really doing very much. And these jobs sort of exist for social reasons. They may exist because of economic inefficiencies. These jobs exist in computer science just as much as they do anywhere else. And I think AI is coming for those jobs. I think it is coming for them very, very soon. I think if you feel secure in such a job, you should not feel secure. There's another kind of job which also exists both in computer science and also in every other discipline, where you are doing hard creative work and thinking difficult and interesting thoughts and solving difficult and interesting problems. And I think that AI is not displacing those jobs anytime soon, unless something very surprising indeed happens. I think there's a chance that AI might become a useful assistant for some of those jobs and make them more productive. That's the happy case.
And what do we think about is there an increased appeal potentially of the humanities in a landscape where at least some digital work is increasingly automated? Or is that just something that has to be reached out and created? It can't happen automatically.
Right. Well, I very diplomatically did not say what I believe the proportion of these different kinds of jobs is in the humanities. But I do actually think that there's I do actually think there's quite a bit of humanities work that is, that is the fake kind. And I think that AI doing a passable job, writing, a literary criticism paper, or, writing a work of analytical philosophy that passes peer review, or I think that is actually going to be incredibly destructive to the prestige of these jobs and probably to the prestige of academia as a whole. So I suspect that the harder sciences, maybe not computer science, but some of the others are going to fare relatively better in this transformation.
All right, it's about 8 o'clock. I'm going to take 2 more questions, one from each side of the room, if that works. Sir? Yep. For Will. Hold on. Let's get your mic.
So for Will, the question is, if you read, I guess, Christian media, religious conservative media, it sounds a lot like AI safetyism often. Often it sounds a lot even like maybe a Christian Yudkowsky. And so the question would be, is this a good thing? Is it a good thing that, there's often this language of skepticism and safetyism as the default tone in Christian media? And then the second question would be, for a young man consuming it, doesn't this kind of point to this question of why Christians aren't running the show in Silicon Valley in terms of, wouldn't he be, less likely to pick up an LLM and start playing with it rather than, he might want to work in AI policy, but not the actual writing code? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So I personally part ways with Yudkowsky on a number of important issues, including, the exact parameters of how AI will kill us all.
Just for the record, these are references to Eliezer Yudkowsky,
right,
who is the
godfather
of AI doom, and the
right,
co-author of the new book. I'm going to get it slightly wrong, but if we build it, everyone dies. This is just so everyone knows who's being referenced. Go on.
That's right. I think leaving aside my many disagreements with him, I think he deserves a lot of credit for really being very early to this issue and for making a lot of very concrete and specific predictions that have come true. He's done pretty well as a prognosticator. So to the extent that his ideas have seeped into Christian discourse, look, I think his ideas are far from the worst ones. Like I said, I don't think he's right about everything, but I think he is a useful sort of John the Baptist who's been crying out there in the wilderness and warning people about a lot of this stuff. Now, I also think it is possible that these systems could usher in some kind of a golden age and could be really, really great. And, I fervently hope that happens. But, I think the thing that Yudkowsky would tell you is, like, do you really want to roll the dice? And is there any way that we can make our odds better? And maybe we should proceed a little bit more deliberately with all this.
But you think that Christians who are informed in some way by this doomerism should nonetheless be going to work in AI, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
There's no higher leverage place to be.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a final question. Yes. Exactly. And then you should all feel free to buttonhole the panelists, but not me, when we go and have coffee afterwards. So usher us out.
I wanted to raise the question of intelligence. So it seems like the large language model understanding of intelligence is a very postmodern one. There's nothing outside the text. So you become intelligent by reading texts, you show you're intelligent by producing texts, but it's not the intelligence that's encountering reality and interpreting it and then applying a judgment to reality. So in that sense, it seems to me that however many $1 trillion is spent on making these more intelligent, that given that computer systems can only really play around with texts, that this is never really going to be intelligent. And that's why they make so many mistakes, I think, because computers aren't experiencing the world, and that's not therefore norming how they're reading texts and interpreting things.
There's a tremendous number of people who agree with you, and they're all trying very hard right now to make robots so that these systems can become smarter through constant contact with reality. I personally, I'm a little agnostic on this, but I think ultimately I'm with the postmodernists. I think a sufficiently detailed description of the world is something that you actually can learn from and become truly intelligent from. I think a fully disembodied AI, a fully disembodied intelligence is totally possible, but we'll see.
What does it mean? Can an AI hold a thought unspoken in its mind? To her point about everything is text, and can that happen, do you think?
So it's very difficult to answer that question because an AI's mind looks very different from ours.
Yes.
And the architecture, something that I think people may not fully understand about present day AI systems is that they are in many ways sort of beings of pure instinct, right? I forget which one is system 1 and system 2 in the neuroscientists' jargon, but they've only got the one where you sort of receive some stimulus and instantly act. They're not very good at planning, if they do it at all. We've retrofitted planning onto them in this really weird sort of hacked on way where they kind of keep a little diary and write down their intermediate stages of thought and then reflect on them in this sort of a loop. But it's still really a simulacrum of thought or planning. But again, this is just the way that the tech tree happens to have gone. This is just I feel like this is all totally contingent. We could have an alternate history where we successfully built AI that was good at planning first and only later developed the intuitive responses. And I think that right now many people are working on trying to combine those two approaches to cognition and make something that can use the strengths of both as we can. And so even if it's true that today an AI cannot think something without blurring it out, I don't think you should count on that.
Okay, there's a lot more there, but we have kept you long enough, so I'd like you to join me in thanking our panel for a discussion that yeah. I had some line about the eschatological frontier, but we'll lay it aside. Thank you all again. Have a good evening.